May the 4th be with you, everyone, and we have a couple different Nintendo stories we are talking about today, one of which having to do with a brand new Star Wars free game trial that you might want to check out. A timeless classic is available for free all the way until May 9th for Nintendo Switch Online players, I should mention. And story number 2 we're talking about today has to do with an interesting development that's been spotted within Nintendo's most recent first-party release, Endless Ocean Luminous, that reveals that the engine that Nintendo is using in this game is now capable of something that could have big implications in terms of how future Nintendo titles might look and run on Nintendo Switch 2. So we'll get on the same page with all those details. Before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first start off by hopping over quickly to the Nintendo Switch sales and deals page, where you can see the following promotion, which is ongoing right now. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic is on a free game trial sale right now. Now this game is both discounted to half price, as well as you can play the entire game for free all the way until May 9th. So if you can beat it in that amount of time, you don't necessarily have to buy it. If you do want to buy it, as mentioned, it's 50% off, as is just about every other major Star Wars classic game on Nintendo Switch right now. You can see the entire list. If you want to pick up the entire Heritage Pack, that is 50% off right now for this May the 4th be with you sale. Or you can pick and choose the titles that you'd like to pick up out of this individually, even a bundle of both the Knights of the Old Republic games for $13.49, but basically 50% off across the board. I don't necessarily feel time pressure to pick these up. We do see them go on sale a lot, but this is some of the better discounts that we do see on them, and it's nice to see Nintendo recognizing the Star Wars celebration time of the year, which of course is May 4th. Knights of the Old Republic, of course, is a timeless RPG, really blew up on PC and things, but of course very popular Xbox version as well back in the day, and it's since been ported to all the other major consoles, but it's available on the Switch. I think it's a great title to own in your library for the Switch, just for that portable gameplay factor. If you didn't grow up with this one and you never played through it originally, you may or may not think it holds up to this day. Also, quick shout out for Xbox players, you can currently play Jedi Survivor on a free game trial, which is an excellent modern day Star Wars. I highly recommend that one. Definitely enjoyed my time with it. So always nice to see some Star Wars love going around online. Then the bigger part 2 of today's news topics has to do with Nintendo and the engine that they are using for the game Endless Ocean Luminous, that you're probably familiar is out right now. I haven't seen a ton of people talk about picking this thing up firsthand. It definitely didn't review very well. It sits currently at just a 63 in Metacritic, one of the lower scoring Nintendo first party titles, we'll say. But I could see if you're somebody who enjoys more of the sit back and relax, cozy type of games, you're not really wanting some kind of intense experience. You really just want to take in the view and scenes of the ocean and enjoy all the different aquatic life you'll find down there. Well, then yeah, you're probably going to enjoy this one. So don't let all the critic reviews sway your decision. See what kind of gameplay loop you like and look at some reviews on it. Maybe it will be enjoyable for you. I'm personally holding off on picking it up myself, but the more interesting piece of information that has come out since this game dropped has to do with some info that has been posted up by very well known data miner Oatmeal Dome, where you can see the following info, which has some big implications for the potential of how fast Switch 2 games will run in frame rate. So you can see this following post, which reads, Nintendo Bezel Engine. The latest version of the engine appears to support higher frame rates like 240 FPS. The Switch can only output 60 FPS. This only applies to games that enable the variable frame rate mode. Not sure if the older engine versions also support this. You can then see the code on screen, which reads the variable frame rate minimum is 10, the variable frame rate maximum is 240, and they do not have the limit enabled, so that is set to false. But essentially, if that was set to true, you could in theory run this game up to 240 frames per second. Now there are some ins and outs around that, and Oatmeal Dome continues, Endless Ocean Luminous uses a new version of the Bezel engine. Thanks WaterTune, where this mode was found. Past Bezel engine games, including both WarioWare titles on Switch, both Mario Party titles, Tetris 99, and some assorted third parties, these use the older version. I should really note that just because the engine supports it doesn't mean that it will be used by actual games. Now that last line of text there is important to note, because just because this engine in theory supports up to 240 frames per second doesn't necessarily mean we will ultimately see Switch 2 games run at that refresh rate. Just the fact that Nintendo has now programmed into this engine that they've utilized for numerous different titles at this point in time, Mario Party and WarioWare specifically, besides Endless Ocean Luminous and various others, this could indeed be one of those indicators you look at that kind of gives us an idea that Nintendo is raising the ceiling on things running past 60 frames per second. I don't necessarily think that we'll see many games utilize anything over 60 FPS on the next gen Switch, but you might realize that while consoles like the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, they don't typically go over 60 frames on their major first party AAA titles by any stretch of the imagination. They do run smaller indie games at 120 and even up to 240 in some cases. And if you're a PC gamer, you're probably well more familiar with just how buttery smooth a frame rate like that looks. And I have played my own fair share of smaller titles on my own gaming PC at a higher frame rate of 120 plus, and you do definitely notice it look like maximum smoothness and kind of that next level of enjoyment. You're not going to get anything like this in the modern day with like 4K resolution or bigger titles, AAA titles like I mentioned, but we might see some of those smaller indie titles. And even look at the catalog of Nintendo Switch eShop titles that are simpler projects from indie developers, or even just games that are AA games that don't look as visually impressive. If you think about the kind of claimed power jump that we are going to be looking at for Nintendo's next gen console, it is very conceivable that a lot of the games that already run 1080p 60 on the current Switch in docked mode could in theory go up to 120 hertz refresh rate very easily, or 120 frames per second, even running the game at a upscaled 4K via something like DLSS. That's entirely on the table, and now Nintendo's own internal engine that they are continuing to build upon and continuing to support and will no doubt use for future projects now has this new higher frame rate limit all the way up to 240 in place, and that has been noted by these data miners within the code for the engine now that Endless Ocean Luminous is out. But again, don't take this to mean that your Marios and your Zeldas and even Animal Crossing and games like that are going to run at 120 frames plus refresh rate or even up to 240. Like, I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon, but I am very much on board with the idea of some of the more simple projects out there getting this 120 frames plus mode. In fact, a good example is Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown that I thoroughly enjoyed on the Nintendo Switch. It definitely didn't have all the visual bells and whistles of the other console versions like the PS5 and the Series X, and those were running at 4K 120 frames per second for that particular title, so you get a little bit more of a buttery smooth frame rate. The Nintendo Switch currently is not going to output anything over 60. That could very well change for the Switch 2, and Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, or all those great 2D Metroidvanias, even something like Metroid Dread, could conceivably maybe run up to 120 frames per second with more powerful console hardware utilizing tech like DLSS, and now Nintendo has it spotted within their own internal game engine. So that's exciting to me, but that's really where I want to hear from you guys at this point in the video. How do you feel about both the different stories? Are you excited for any of the Star Wars game discounts? Are you going to be picking up the Nintendo Switch Online members free game trial for Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic? And the bigger question, do you think we will see Nintendo support things like higher frame rate on the next gen console, in addition to maybe some features we haven't talked about too much like HDR and other things? You think that's something that's coming for their next gen tech, or do you think that's maybe something that Nintendo will not focus on as much? Or are you kind of like me where you think we're not going to see it necessarily in the Mario and Zelda games of the world, but we will probably see it on some of these smaller AA titles that could definitely have a chance at running at that 120 plus frame rate with things like 4K resolution, with things like DLSS upscaling? And are you excited for the Nintendo Switch 2 tech, and are you hopeful we hear anything about it at the upcoming investors meeting on May 7th? Or do you think we're going to be in a Switch 2 news drought for the foreseeable future? So thanks so much for watching the video today. Make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings, regardless of if we agree or disagree, in the comments down below. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell on your way out, and I will see you guys next time.